a preacher, theologian, in a plot to take down evil. Born in 1906 in Breslau, which is now current-day Poland, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a man of passion and steadfast principles. From the age of 14, Bonhoeffer knew that he wanted to be a theologian. His beliefs were unwavering like the seafloor clinging to an anchor. Bonhoeffer loved the advancement of self and wanted to be the best disciple of teachings that he could possibly be, so he enrolled in Berlin University. At that time, Berlin was the best university in the world for teaching theology. However, shortly after being accepted into the university, he quickly realized that the religious views he carried differed from those who surrounded him. Bonhoeffer viewed the Bible to be very much alive. He viewed that the principles and stories written within the text were still needing to be related to everyday realities. The pupils in his classroom viewed it as though a lot of it has been disproved, and they just wanted to study the text for historical reference. Bonhoeffer quickly said no, and that there is a God behind the text and that he wants us to know him personally. Bonhoeffer realized that he was in a sea of theological liberalism in Berlin. Theological liberalism was something where people didn't really believe the teachings wholeheartedly, but still wanted to go along with the motions. It seemed as though Germany viewed it since that we gave the world Martin Luther, we are now set. In using this same rhetoric, in a sense, this is how Adolf Hitler quickly rose to power. Hitler made the Germans perceive him as being a strong Christian. Hitler knew that if he didn't come off this way, his agenda would never move forward. So Hitler was good at pretending to walk the walk and talk the talk of Christianity. Hitler spoke out against communism and Bolshevism and spoke about how he was for principles and values. All of this was a front, of course, and he hid behind what was a mask of resentment for the Christian way of life. But Hitler knew that if he was to reveal this should surely be the end to his rise of power. However, Bonhoeffer saw through the mask of Hitler for who he truly was. Bonhoeffer, from a young age, was trained to think rigorously. Therefore, it made it very difficult to fool him. His family also had many social connections, and they knew, even before Hitler became chancellor, they knew exactly how corrupt he was and how much he truly was anti-German and anti-Christian. 2 days after Hitler takes his place as chancellor, Bonhoeffer goes on the radio airwaves meticulously dissecting Adolf Hitler. Bonhoeffer wouldn't stop. Until his death 12 years later, Bonhoeffer would continuously condemn and criticize Hitler and the Nazis. At this time, many of the preachers and theologians moved aside and looked the other way in order to avoid confrontation. There was, however, a few leaders of faith who stood strong, and Bonhoeffer was the leader of that pack. They knew that they needed to stand up to the Nazis for fear the Nazis would take over the church. The Nazis wanted to take over the church with the intent of looking at it with racial lines. Bonhoeffer stood up and said, "No, you can't do that." Bonhoeffer's best friend was a Jew who converted to Christianity and wanted to also become a preacher, but the Nazis viewed it that he had Jewish blood, so he can't be a member of the clergy. The Nazis wanted to racially divide the church. Bonhoeffer and his men stood up and said no more. And from this day, the Barmen Declaration was born. It was almost like a petition that the clergymen from all over signed on to say that the Nazis cannot take over the church. And from this declaration, Bonhoeffer's Confession Church came alive. So it was Bonhoeffer's Confession Church and the Nazis' Right Church. Immediately, the Right Church of the Nazis marked the members and the clergy of the Confessions Church as being the enemy. The Nazis, one by one, started to send those from the Confession Church to the front lines and to concentration camps, and little by little, they were decimated. Before the war completely broke out, Bonhoeffer knew that he wouldn't continue to make it in Germany, so he fled to America. Quickly after arriving, though, he knew he made a big mistake. He felt God calling him to go back to Germany and stand with his people in this time of evil. So Bonhoeffer turned back around and headed back to Germany. With the Nazis growing bigger and bigger each day, Bonhoeffer needed to find a way of helping, because if he was to return to the church, he would be kidnapped and sent to a concentration camp. So Bonhoeffer became a spy, working closely with his brother-in-law, who was a member of the German Military Intelligence Agency, and the agency at that time was against the Nazis and Adolf Hitler. So Bonhoeffer and his brother-in-law began to conspire against the Nazis. At this point, Bonhoeffer is a spy, and he is also helping the Jews to escape. As time goes on, the target on his head from the Nazis is starting to come in to better focus. In 1941, Bonhoeffer is arrested and sent to a prison, and 1 year later, he is sent to Flossenburg concentration camp. And with direct orders from Hitler, on April 9, 1945, Bonhoeffer is murdered by the Nazis at dawn. Because of his faith in Jesus and standing up for the Jews, he was put to death. Just hours before Bonhoeffer's death, as he walked to his death place, he was preaching and standing firm in his beliefs. Bonhoeffer was a man who lived his faith each and every day. He was a man who stood in the face of Nazism and called it for what it was: pure evil. That day, Bonhoeffer died a martyr and a hero. If anyone is an example of how God calls you to live, Bonhoeffer is certainly that.